welcome back, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Stacy and I am the Chapter Conundrum, and in today's video we're going to do the opposite of my last video. So today we're going to talk about books that took me a while to get into, or books that took me kind of a little bit of time to get invested into. My previous video, if you didn't see it, was books that hooked me right from chapter 1 or right from the beginning. So if you were kind of like in a slump and you need something to hook you right away, that is the place to go for recommendations. But today we're doing the opposite. So if you're in the mood to sort of like piece things together a little bit more slowly, or to have more of a plot like slowly unfold, then this is definitely a good recommendations video for you right now. And the first one I want to talk about is The Lies of Locke Lamora. And the first time I picked this up, I almost DNF'd it. The second time I picked it up, it was a 5-star read. So that should be a pretty good indication. Like, this took me a while to get into and sink my teeth into. So essentially what you need to know about Locke Lamora is this is a story about Locke Lamora. He's a street orphan who is pulled into a crime organization called the Gentlemen Bastards. And this story is told in 2 timelines. In the present day timeline, you have this crew trying to pull off an elaborate heist within the aristocracy of the city. And in the past timeline, you were seeing Locke get introduced to this crime organization and go through a lot of training and getting to know his comrades. So part of the reason I had such a vastly different experience with this on the second go around is because I had some of that context up front, so I didn't feel quite as thrown in, and I knew that there was going to be an elaborate heist that unfolded slowly over the course of the book, which it did. But the second main reason is that the second time I picked this up, I picked up the audiobook. And Michael Page, the narrator, injects so much life into this story. He nails the humor bang on, and just the way he tells this story had me so much more invested than when I tried to read it myself. So definitely recommend the audio for this one as well. Next up, we're going to talk about one of my favorite fantasy plots. And it kind of in similar vibes to Locke Lamora, we have a main character who is a street orphan, but in this one, he decides he wants to apprentice himself to a master assassin, and that's kind of how he's going to better his circumstances. And if you don't know, I'm of course talking about The Way of Shadows, the first book in the Night Angel trilogy by Brent Weeks. And this one did take me a while to get into. So you do have other POVs in here as well. But I think the main thing that really hooked me into the story is when I understood sort of like the bigger picture political intrigue that's going to be happening here. And that definitely took a while to sort of unfold and get a better grasp of. So it was really like once I started understanding like how the pieces of the plot were going to come together in a bigger picture that I got really hooked. I did really like Azoth, or Kyla, our main character, as well. But definitely the bigger picture plot is what had me really get invested of this, and it did take a while. But if you have the patience to get there, the payoff is great. Another one that I ended up really having a good time with, but that just took me a while to get into, is Bloodsong by Anthony Ryan, the first book in the Raven's Shadow trilogy. And I think this one was just a case of it was very kind of slowly paced compared to what I was used to reading at the time that I picked it up. And for that reason, it definitely took me a while. But also one of the highlights of this book for me is sort of the brotherhood and like found family dynamic in here. And that's definitely something that develops over the course of the book. And so it really was like the second half of this book where I got more and more invested in the story and started really loving it. There are also some other elements to the later parts of the story that had me more intrigued. So like one of our animal companions in here, Spit. If you haven't met Spit and you like opinionated animal companions with personality, then you're kind of missing out and you need to read this too. But yeah, I think with this one, the more you read, the more you sort of understand the bigger picture of the world, what's going on. You get a better understanding of a lot of things, and you get to meet new characters and animal companions later. So for all those reasons, this did take me a while to get invested in. Moving into a thriller that took me a while, we got to talk about Defending Jacob by William Landay. And if you listen to like the old Serial podcast, this is kind of the same vibe as that, where it's a situation where you're sort of presented with a criminal case. And as the story unfolds, you're sort of presented with more information, facts, and questions about the case. And it's a lot of you kind of figuring out, did this character do this? Did they not? And maybe you're kind of wiffle waffling on, oh, they must have totally done this. This makes so much sense. And then you're presented with new information, and then you sort of second guess that. And it's a lot of like the wiffle waffling, flip flopping, I don't know what to think anymore kind of experience in a read. And because of that being like the main draw to the story for me, it does take a lot of time to kind of set up the initial information in the initial case. It also takes its time to let you get to know the character, and it's more of just like a slow unfolding of all of the relevant information and details for you to be able to have an opinion on in the end. So definitely this is one that took me a while to get into, but once I was invested, it definitely kept my interest. Another thriller that took me a while was The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager, and I know that this is a very polarizing one, but for me, I had never felt more surprised or more duped by a thriller twist ever, and I completely loved the experience of that. But I will say, getting to the point where you found out the twist was much slower for me, and I was questioning how invested I was in the story leading up to that point. I think this is definitely one where it's like the twist is a make it or break it. For some people it's a break it. For me it was a make it. I think another aspect to that is that this is in an isolated setting with very few characters, and I wasn't overly drawn to the main character for the first while. So yeah, for those reasons, this definitely took a while to get into. The third thriller I want to talk about today is Playing Nice by J.P. Delaney, and this is one that I kind of almost would argue, like, it's solidly a thriller, but I kind of argue that it might work better for horror readers. And the reason for that is because you have a setup, and you as the reader are very clearly like sensing that this dreadful situation is coming. And like the first half of the book is a lot of like, oh, this crap is gonna hit the fan soon. And it's a lot of like mounting dread, similar to what you would experience while reading a horror. But then that point in the story hits, everything starts going wrong, and it becomes a bit of a wild ride from there. And at the time that I picked this up, I wasn't really reading a ton of horror, so I hadn't really familiarized myself with like the scenario of like mounting dread, and that didn't necessarily like hook me into the story. It was more in this one when everything went wrong and the story shifted that I really got invested. But once that happened, it was wild, and I had such a good time reading it. Moving back into fantasy, another one that took me ages to get into is The Hammer by KJ Parker. And this is more of like an alternate history, sort of. There isn't any magic in here, and I kept waiting for there to be magic in this plot because I didn't know that going in. I had just been told that this was fantasy. So that is definitely part of the reason this took me a while to get into, but it wasn't the only reason. The main character definitely takes a while to get to know, but I think the more the story unfolds, the more you get to see of the main character's actions and decisions and personality, the more tension is introduced in the story, and the more I got invested. So definitely this was another one that took me eons to get into, but once I was interested, I was interested. And I also really liked how this ended and thought that it was cleverly foreshadowed in prior, and I completely like missed the foreshadowing in the moment, but then in hindsight was like, oh, duh. But then really enjoyed how I was able to look back at that in hindsight. So yeah, this is another one that took me ages to get into. Another one that took me a while was Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. And I actually can remember it's somewhere around the chapter 20 mark where I really got invested in this. And I think it's because that's kind of like when your expectations of what had been laid out so far were subverted. And when you found out new information that kind of changed the tone of the story, or at least for me, in one of the points of view, it changed the tone of the story. I'm also not the hugest fan of Avena's point of view, and she sort of dominates the page time in the beginning of this a little bit more. So that's another reason that this took me a while to get into. And sort of like, despite that feeling about her POV sort of carrying throughout the book for me, I ended up really, really liking this once that tone shift and new information happened. Siri is hands down my favorite character in here, and also if you're familiar with Sando, you know that his magic systems are some of the most interesting aspects of his work. And I think this book just really took its time introducing you to Siri, getting your footing in sort of her side of the story, and also just learning the magic system. So for those reasons, this definitely took me a while to get invested into, but I really enjoyed it once I was there. Another fantasy that took me ages to get into, but that I ended up loving once I did, and for different reasons, is Malice, the first book in the Faithful of the Fallen series by John Gwynne. And with this one, it's just that the first 20 or so chapters throw out so much information at the reader. You have what feels like a billion named characters without a ton of understanding about who they all are. I actually had to take like really detailed notes to be able to figure out who everybody was, like moving past those first 20 chapters. And I'm so glad I did, because the payoff of that and being able to have theories on things was much better for having done that. I do know that in Valor there is a character list that is helpful, but that it's spoilery for Malice. So this is a bit of a rough start for that reason. But if you're in the mood to have that kind of brain power while reading, this is definitely one that has the payoff and the reward for having done that work, in my opinion, and that I ended up really loving after I got beyond the stages of having to figure everything out and being introduced to everything. Then the last one I want to talk about today is one that you've heard me talk about in this context before, but it is an all-time favorite, and so I still want to talk about it again, and that is The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wong. And the beginning of this is pretty rough. There is a lot of info dumping and world building and some character backstory stuff that doesn't feel all that relevant in the moment, but eventually you get into more of the action of the story, and then the falling action of the story and the emotional, heartfelt character stuff based on that falling action. And sort of like the action and the falling action is really where this hooked me and where I understood the relevance of the beginning and why it was worth it. But in the first third or so of this, I was not that invested, and by the end it was an all-time favorite. So this definitely belongs on this list, and I would be remiss if I didn't talk about it. Let me know down below in the comments what books fell into this vein or category for you. What books did you love by the end, but that took you a hot minute or a good chunk of to get invested into the story with? And do you know why you had that experience? I'd like to know, if you do know, what the reasoning behind why it took you a while to get into was. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe on your way out if you want to, and have a great day. Bye!